All right. Welcome to another Data Hurdles. I'm Chris Detzel and
I'm Michael Burke. How you doing, Chris?
pretty good, man. How about you?
Really good. Since our last episode, which I think now we recorded 2 weeks ago, if I recall correctly, I had a baby girl. So we have a new member of
Oh,
our family, and my mind has been totally preoccupied since we last connected. So
you mean you haven't been thinking about data?
not at all, not at all. I've just been thinking about like how to react to something where I get no data from it, right? So
Exactly.
uh,
Well, that's awesome, man. And congratulations. And
thank you.
before we forget, we have a special guest today, Alex Welch. And Alex, how are you?
Doing really well. Thanks for inviting me on here.
Yeah, you're from DBT Labs and you are head of data and analytics. Is that right?
Sure. Yes. I've been there for just under a year now. So
Okay.
started last December.
Awesome.
Yeah, great. So, Alex, let's just dive in. Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you get into the data space, what you do today, and all of those kinds of things. And then we'll dive into our topic today.
Yeah. So just a quick, I think touch on really quickly just what I've been doing the last decade. And then
Yeah.
it is interesting we talk about how I actually got into it. But so for the past little over a decade, I've been working in the FinTech space, particularly in companies that build platforms for derivative traders. And so I've been part of a couple exits, helping build up companies, being sold, never gone public, but through private acquisitions. And so I've had lots of really interesting experiences, both like being create a data team within this already established org, create a data team with nothing, inherit data team in a larger org and kind of figure out the organizational structure and things like that. And then when I last year was thinking I wanted to try something different, and BT Lab came along, and it's a completely different beast. It's enterprise SaaS, not B2C type of platforms, and so it's been a incredibly exciting challenge and learning a lot, but a lot of the same paradigms and concepts when you're thinking about data teams translates well in relationships and things like that. Yeah, it's just into the new business model, learning all those new concepts, and then applying what we can.
Yeah, it's great.
No, that's
Go
that,
ahead, Michael.
I was just going to say, I've heard so much about DBT Labs over the years. I was most of my career, I've been a big Databricks user for the past, and like the coupling for so long, these guys were so close to one another. In that kind of collaboration and workflow. Chris, go ahead. I don't know. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, I'm glad you did because it's funny because when I told Michael that we are going to interview you and talk to you, he's like, DBT Labs? I know the
Yeah, another cool company. I was like, you guys, I've seen you guys for years. This is great. So can you tell us, just break it down really quickly at DBT Labs, what are you doing and how are you as the head of data kind of driving value within the ecosystem, which is now massive, right? They've grown, I don't know how many X over the past few years, but crazy.
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand the stage we're in, right? So you have like your startup phase where you're doing product market fit. And you're really trying to figure those types of things out. And at that point, a lot of the analytics that are really important are top level. It's okay, what are my revenue? Maybe some cohorting to really understand like nuances of your acquisition. But we have very solidly transitioned into this go to market phase where getting out there, expanding pipeline, expanding presence is really important. And when you do that, the rest of the organization starts to scale as well. And everything becomes much more nuanced too, right? It's not just, I want to see cohort. I want to see this group of population, how they interact with X feature, and what does that mean in terms of the retention if they do Y. Yeah. So it is looking at the stage we're in and saying, okay, how do we facilitate that? How do we not become a bottleneck currently we're a centralized data org. And if you don't be very thoughtful about that, you can very quickly become a bottleneck. You can be that scapegoat where people are saying like, I'm not getting my data. I don't know what I'm doing. I have no visibility. And so right now we're looking at, okay, like what is the next evolution of the actual composition of our data team? What does that look like in terms of how it works with different functions? So like, how are we going to work directly with product? How are we going to work with sales and operations and marketing in very specific ways so that we can get those nuances, we can tie into the strategy, and we can actually drive value there.
I love that so much. In one of my earlier roles, I was working tightly with the marketing team as an AI and kind of data group. And one of the things that we were working on was like data as a product is a term that we use a lot now, but wasn't quite there 8 years ago or whatnot. And actually being able to build products where, depending on who you are, maybe different things show up differently within the application, right? If you're a data steward versus a data engineer, for example, you might have completely different needs on what you need to see in a menu or a dropdown, right?
Yep.
And like that prioritization of features and without confusing users between documentation and other things, but can you level up certain capabilities to make them more accessible and more
Yep.
relevant?
Yeah, absolutely. That's very much in line. So Tristan, our CEO, released a white paper about the ADLC, the Analytics Development Lifecycle, and I wrote a companion article for that. But the core of that is, and I'm going to tie it back to what you were talking about, is this concept of personas and how you can trade the hat and move across personas as you need to. And we can talk more about that later because I think it fits in well when we are developing, when you are thinking about the features, what you want to release. You want to build things in a way that allow people to change those hats, but doesn't create friction or having them to completely change the frame of reference in their context. So it feels natural, part of the ecosystem and part of their flow. And it really augments their flow instead of being a barrier, right?
Yeah, totally. I always think back to Adobe Photoshop, if you've used that tool ever, in like their modes, right? You can select like the designer mode or the presenter mode or the curator mode. If you're an illustrator, you need different things, right? And I think this is actually a really good segue into one of our first questions that I'd love to dive into, which is AI has become such a household term over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
But AI-driven changes in the data industry really are different from previous technological shifts.
Yeah.
And especially related to your work today, how do you see AI driving new change within your ecosystem?
Yeah. So I see not just in my ecosystem, but like in the data industry in general, two primary differences between past like shifts we've seen and this AI one. And so the first is previous shifts were primarily tool based, right? So moving from like mainframes to client servers and then eventually to cloud, right? And it really focused and changed on how we work. The other big difference is that the shifts were largely deterministic, right? And that's completely different than what AI is now. So like jumping back into the first one, we're talking about tool-based paradigms that shift, right? AI has changed what we work on and what work is actually done, not necessarily completely how we do it, right? Like it changes, like we product engineer and we do those types of things. But now AI is really representing like cognitive transformation, right? It requires a lot more judgment when you get outputs and like review. And it started to blur those roles, the boundaries between roles. And I really think that in previous shifts, it was about amplifying human capacity and our skills. And now it's really focused on augmenting our cognition, which is a huge shift between throwing a hammer up and down and then understanding that this hammer is not great for putting something in a screws, right?
Totally. I love that. I think that's such a good analogy to the ecosystem of how we do things. It might change in the future, but certainly not now. We still now have to think through process in a way that is, at least in my opinion, I'm sure there's people that disagree here. This is now a new territory that we're walking into. We still need to think through process when we're doing everything. And we still are experts in this space. And we need to think of AI as additive, not a replacement. And for most things that we're doing in the world, in my opinion, at least, right?
I think, yeah.
So with this kind of change, what do you consider to be the top 3 best practices for organizations looking to adopt AI tools in their data operations? There is a lot more coming, I think, with large language models and some of the things that we're seeing with multi-model build-outs and how those are evolving, I would say, like process of thought. How do you see that changing in DBT Labs, data space, really?
Oh, so are you talking about just the impact they're going to have or like the 3 best practices when you're like looking at the org? And
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, if you are actually seriously considering adopting AI, I think there are like 3 really core areas to focus on, right? You have your data foundation, which has to be solid, right? You need a data quality framework where you're going after all the usual suspects, right? Accuracy, completeness, consistency, et cetera, et cetera. You need a,
Quick question on that, because Michael and I, and even in our past experiences, we talk a lot about data quality and how important that is. And it's core. It's been a 20-year long conversation that nobody really is seemed to figure out, I mean, can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think it's just such a hard problem to solve,
Sure. It really is. I think there's never going to be a true solid answer. I literally just said you need a good data quality framework. And I think the key word there is a framework, right? Like you need to have something in there where you have your automated validation rules and checks, and you have some sort of error detection or anomaly detection going on. Maybe you have some run books in place for when certain aspects of the pipeline fail. Things like that really help. And then I think another area that people and teams skip over in the early days is actually putting metrics around these things. So you can actually do what it is, right? If you're not tracking your data quality in terms of like your freshness metrics or your accuracy or your row volumes, basic things like that, if you're not looking at that and saying, okay, how am I responding to these? Is it something that continually happens, and using that as a feedback loop? Your data quality is going to suffer, and it may not be a lot at first, but it's just like that. It's accumulation of that, and it will continue to get worse. And yeah, I think the key word there is just a framework that you can give to your engineers, give to your teams, where they go, okay, now at least I know where I should be focusing my quality efforts.
Yeah.
And it removes a certain level of ambiguity and the mental load that they have to take on to actually take action.
I think that was great. And I love the little bit more detail around the data quality, the metrics, and just what you should look at to at least, pushing out, hey, it's just a framework. But I think it's important because, just talking high level data quality that a lot of people do is let's dive deeper into that to make sure and understand what that really means. Thank you. That was good.
Yeah. And I'm a huge, and you'll probably hear me use the word framework tons of times over the course of this. I'm a huge of just, okay, here's the guidelines, right? And you've hired your individuals for their skill sets, for their expertise, right? So here's the boundaries, and go and do what you think is best, like how you're executing things like that. But at least you have that framework in place so that they can execute in it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to add to it too. I feel like data quality is in so many ways like a misused term, because it's almost like telling a runner they need to run faster, right? It's what is important? What do you need to optimize in your ecosystem to improve quality? If you're a runner, do you need new shoes? Do you need to change your biomechanics? There's 1,000 things that you could think about.
Yeah.
And the same thing with data quality is like, I think when we say these words, we think about certain things like, oh, the data needs to be accurate, or it needs to be cleaned or merged properly. But there's so much more on top of that with what are you steering towards, right? What are you trying to get value? What is the value that you're running after, right, in your ecosystem?
Yeah. I have a couple of thoughts on that. One, I think your running analogy is excellent there, right? Because everybody that goes out and runs is a little bit different, right? You always hear these new training paradigms or whatever it is, but a lot of that is framework put around, okay, within the context of slow runs and mixing it with speed runs and running efficient metrics, right? All of that, you have your framework and you fit it in where you can excel in that. And then the other thing I was going to say is, I think a common trap that data teams fall into is looking at their entire stack and saying, like, I need accuracy across the board. I need 100% or 99%. And in doing so, you're treating every individual component of your ecosystem with the same level of criticality and scrutiny, when it probably shouldn't be. You probably have a bunch of data in there that's, not as business critical, right? And if that goes down, maybe it can wait 2 days or 3 days. But if your like revenue numbers or your real time to your contact center goes down, you need to be able to execute and make sure that data is accurate. So if I had to give like a big piece of advice, it's look at your ecosystem and say, what are the critical elements? Let's start there and get that accuracy in those quality metrics, and then like triage down from there. And spending the time on the right things, especially when you're trying to implement something like an AI initiative.
Well, and you don't want to, some of these programs or projects could seem like bull in the ocean.
Oh,
so if you have all these data systems with all this data in there, maybe you start with one or two rather than, oh, everything needs to be done within 6 months, right?
Absolutely.
You're just going to go and piece it together, because to me, it's sometimes you get in these programs like, I want this and this and this. And I can't do all of that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's going to take time. And like you said, what's the priority? What needs to be done first, and then go from there. I love that.
Yeah. Going back, I think that feeds well because you have a data quality, but it also goes into like setting up a data governance framework. I think that's really important for your org when you're getting ready for that. And I think you need data owners who are accountable, and they also have the ability to make decisions about the system. I think traditionally we've separated those two, where you have analysts who are accountable for the data that's coming out of it, but then they don't have the ability to actually go in and make decisions, changes about what is happening underneath the hood. And I think that's a really cool thing about DBT is we started to bridge that and allow that to happen. But then you need other things like perhaps like a governance committee to help set policy and settle discrepancies and alignment issues. Or in what I think is going to be particularly important are this concept of data stewards that live within different verticals. And the reason I believe they're going to be really important is because of the domain expertise. And as you give out more finely tuned AI systems that are specific to marketing or sales or whatever it is, you need somebody who has that really nuanced information and mindset to be able to go in and like help guide that and roll that out in addition to your data and engineers and stuff like that.
Totally. It's like, I think as practitioners, we want to centralize, right? We want to standardize. It's in our nature to want organization and structure, but at the same time, experts are going to be collecting information and having insights that we will never have. And I think like such a good example of this was early in my career, I used to think that we should be able to do everything with data. Like we should be able to make informed decisions on everything.
Yep.
And then I remember much later, like I was at a sales meeting with this sales guy who is tenure. He's been in the industry 40 years. We're talking to this customer and I walk away thinking, all right, this is closed. Like we know enough about this customer's insights. Like we're going to get this.
Yeah.
And he looks at me and goes, no, he's not. Did you hear his tone change at X, Y, and Z points? And I was like, no, what? I totally missed that. And it was like, that was the quality of data that somebody who's been in the industry for 40 years is going to capture. We'll never be able to centralize, right? That's an expert operating in an independent silo that needs to happen that way. But like somehow, I think in this ideal system, we are able to pull that kind of information back faster and more efficiently so that others can learn from it. We're so far away still. I think with everything that we have in this ecosystem, there's still a lot more insights that like I think we don't give ourselves credit to say that we have a lot more to learn to be able to really make these informed decisions.
The other component of that is, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. No, I think the other component is your point. Like, yeah, we will never have that context of being able to read the tone and whatever is in the room, but nor should we, right? That's not our core competency. That's why that individual exists in the organization. That's their specialty. That's the value that they bring. It is understanding that we are like just the central node of intelligence and everything that goes on, but everyone's there for a reason and for their expertise.
Have you ever thought about going back to the data governance specific thing is I've been in companies where, I mean, you do whatever you want. You know what I mean?
Go
kind of thing. And to some degree, and maybe to Michael's point, some people need that and some people don't, but I find it very difficult to go into a company that has very rigorous data governance and other governance kind of things that have been around for a long time to, if you want to build something from ground up or do something that needs, a ticket here, a ticket there, a ticket, like how am I going to do this? And how do you say, okay, this person's coming in, let them have access to certain things like contacts or I don't know, whatever, I got to think about some of that. And I guess nothing's perfect. It's just hard to make it good, really good,
Yeah, I think there's a few things to unpack there. I think one of them is governance committees and that those organizations within broader enterprises. I think they oftentimes lack that review cycle where they say, why do we have this policy in place? Why is this existing? And if that is no longer the case, like for example, going through the whole migration into cloud, right? There was this huge pushback from what I call legacy industries like finance, healthcare, logistics, saying our data is too valuable. We can't give it to AWS. We can't do it this way. And therefore, we're going to lock everything down. And you also saw that similar thing happen with AI, right? Like we're going to lock out everyone's access to ChatGPT, to Claude. And it's just part of that is not quite understanding the technology and really understanding the value and the security measures around it. You need to have that feedback cycle so that you are removing policies that are prohibitive. And I'm also a big believer, at the stage in the company, one of the things you need to do is put in policy. You need to put in governance, right? And so I was literally just talking to one of our data engineers today, and he's feel like I'm always going process. But it's a good thing as long as it meets two different criteria, right? One is that it's not introducing more friction than it needs. Sometimes it needs friction, sometimes it doesn't. The other is that it is being successful in offloading the mental load that people have, and it informs them about what and how they should be doing. So I think those two components in conjunction with continually reevaluating your policies and why are really critical together, so that you don't over policy something. You need it, but you can't go overboard.
I like that. That's good.
And I totally agree with that. There's so many things. And Chris, I feel like in the example you bring up, you are in some ways the victim of somebody who's caught up in bureaucratic policy, and that can be challenging at times. But at the same time, like, to play devil's advocate, what if that policy didn't exist and you could just send whatever emails to millions of people or delete some data in some table that you weren't supposed to have access to? I've been there. I've created systems where that's happened.
Yeah.
And there might be 10 other departments that are running their business on that centralized data system that you built, and some engineer came in.
Hey, I don't need to edit any of the information. I just need
Yeah, totally.
I don't have a right to look.
We live in such a complicated ecosystem nowadays where there's so many codependencies that even something as simple as reading or taking action on a piece of data could have huge downstream effects that we're not aware of, right?
Yeah.
Because we are in silos inherently in larger ecosystems, whether we like to believe it or not.
Even smaller ones, right? You have that silo data team, which is a silo, and then you have these other groups that are springing up. So, I mean, it exists in orgs of all sizes, really.
So jumping back here, companies that are, moving into this AI space and trying to make sense of, AI catalyzed shifts. I know a lot of CIOs and CDOs now have huge budgets to invest into AI. What do you think the biggest hurdles are today in starting some of these projects?
Yeah, I think I identified 2 hurdles. One, and I'll rank them. One is data debt, tech debt. The other is skills and culture gap. So going back to the debt perspective, right? It is one of those things that everyone knows exists. It impacts a ton of things, right? It can ultimately impact your model performance, your reliability. It can impact your implementation timelines, and all that kind of coalesces around like impacting the ROI of your success, right? And the thing about tech debt is it doesn't go away. It just continually compounds over time, and it can break your lineage, create data silos. And if you aren't conscientious about resolving that, or at least paying it down or restructuring it in some way, and your AI depends on data assets that come out of that ecosystem, you're going to find yourself spending more time diving in, trying to understand why certain things are happening, especially in an AI system. If you don't have the right outputs that explain why it made the decisions it made, right? You're just going to be like, why does all this exist? Why is this 2 different versions of the same metric? So I think that's the number one thing that we really have to take a look at when you're implementing AI. The other is skills and culture, right? There's going to be resistance to change, and that's just a constant for everything, right? And that can be fear of the new technology, not understanding it, not wanting your job to change. All these types of things are going to create this friction and this resistance in the horde. And then also just getting the right people with the right skills to do the things you want to do. So I think those would be the 2 big ones, I think.
Yeah. And I think that the skills piece is so interesting because we've now moved to this world where everyone's you don't need as much skill. And I think that is such a loaded assumption to make, right? That walking into is, oh no, we can give it to a large language model and you get results and you can use those results. And it's okay, how do you interpret those results? Why do you think that a machine made those decisions? And how are you going to take that data and what are you going to do with it? Those are all like pieces that if you haven't worked and analyzed and understood a lot of these technical components, it's really hard to get the right kind of value out of this. And you could be driving things in a completely wrong direction, right?
Absolutely.
I can't even imagine right now how cohorting has changed, right? It's been a while since I've been in that space, but I'm sure it can be, the explainability gets a lot more complicated, right? Can you use a large language model to explain a cohort, or do you need to do your traditional A/B testing that you've had to do like for decades before, right? Especially for companies getting into this. And I know that there's just like such a push from every company that I've talked to about like doing more with AI. And I think that's great, but don't replace a highway in your ecosystem, right? Start with something really small because you are just going to get run over thinking that you're working with an expert when you're taking the wrong actions still. And to me, like data quality is partly about having the right engineers and resources to be able to analyze information, to understand what to do with it. And we've missed that piece over the last year and a half, and we think that we've replaced it, but there's still so much more there that assumptions that we're making, right? And you're starting to see these things backfire more and more, which is funny is, AI professionals and data professionals being like, let's probably shouldn't have done that, right? They're taking those 3 steps.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to your comments earlier about boiling the ocean, right?
Yeah.
If we're trying to bring in AI to solve the big problem of give my users unfettered access to insights off my data. It's probably not the right initiative that you want to start out with. It may be, the real focus, at least my belief is, and how I'm approaching it is to look for use cases where I can augment my team, help them identify data quality, help them troubleshoot when problems happen. What other automations can I do to free up their time so they can use it on the most valuable aspect of their job, right? And eliminate that kind of tedious and wasting the system as it gets generated.
I love this. And I think this is a really good segue into how do you see humans and AI interacting with data management and analysis moving forward? Let's scope it a little bit, right? Let's say in the next year, right? What are some of the changes and ways that people should really be adopting or leveraging these technologies, especially when we say AI? I think we're talking about large language models, but me if I'm wrong here. How do you see people using it?
Yeah, I think it's going to change things pretty dramatically. So if I had to draw a parallel, it might be like might be a terrible parallel, but like the spreadsheets and how they didn't actually replace financial teams or accountants, but it completely transformed the role of what they do, the skill sets they need to actually do their job. And it augmented their job so like they didn't have to type in stuff manually in the calculator and write it down, and reduced errors in the system, and maybe introduced a bunch more because we all know spreadsheet hell and how that works out. But if I had to draw that parallel, right? And so if you keep that in mind, there are like some core areas I think that will change. And that's one of them is just this evolution of roles and responsibilities, right? And how that changes over time. For example, an analyst, right? If they're moving from having to troubleshoot a model or no longer having to do manual data processing, there's a world where they spend 60% more time on strategic work. So there's stuff like that. There's this division of labor from a cognition standpoint. AI is really great at pattern recognition and repetitive tasks. Like you can hand over your pattern detection or your basic analyses or report generation to AI, right? But then for humans, you reserve that brain power for strategic thinking, right? What is the problem definition? How does this align to the broader strategy? And they all have their own weaknesses, but I think that's going to be another thing that really highlights the interplay between humans and AI. And then you start talking about like interaction models off of that. Once you understand the strengths and weaknesses of both of them, and then you start defining how you want them to interact with each other. And I think you can bucket into 2 different areas. You have like decision support, where it's like AI generates an opinion and then the human comes in and makes some choices, has a conversation and refines that. And then you can have like knowledge enhancement, where there's context that's given by the AI and then the human turns around and gives their expertise. And that's more like continuous learning down the path.
I love that example of kind of AI being more proactive and providing a question, right? Or a solution and saying, what do you think? I totally agree that I think that's going to be a huge piece of this is, hey, you've got 1,000 pieces of data you need to review. Here's my guess on what it looks like. Does this look roughly right to you? And I think as we think of like, how do you work between a junior, a senior, and a principled data professional? It's similar, right? Like the senior or principled data professional doesn't have time to actually review everything that a junior person does. Maybe an intern they have to, but they say, hey, what do you think about this? And you look at it, and you eyeball what they're doing. You look at maybe a first 100 records or something and say, yeah, this is the output we're thinking about here.
Yeah. So design. Yeah, I like that. Really thought.
So a couple things that you mentioned was, look, I think AI changes everything, but somebody asked me one day, what advice would you give to a young person using AI and all this? I mean, they're just going to have it.
Yeah.
Advice I can give to them because they're just going to be using it on a consistent basis. It's more advice to 30-plus-year-olds that are worried about their jobs. Before the internet, we actually had jobs and had to do everything by paper. But then we had to change the way we did things. Then it took years and years to do it all in a digital world, moving file cabinets into, Google Drives and whatever. That's how it's going to change the world. Our jobs will change.
Yeah.
Everybody's job will change. It's like, Just a year ago, I needed a blog writer to write all of my blogs. Now I can take the transcript, write a blog in 3 minutes, which used to take me a week or two. And then I'd have to find an expert to clean up the blog. I don't need it. Something that took 2 weeks or so now takes 5 minutes.
Oh,
Yeah. So,
remarkable. Yeah.
so those jobs do go away ish, right? I'm not saying that people can't have an eye and just clean it up, make things better. And I just think that it will. AI changes everything in a big way. We don't know everything. We know some ways with the Claudes and the Chat GPTs and things like that. But even more so, it's going to be embedded into every single product. It's going to just be, for every single product company, talks about, we're doing AI, everything. And that's just the thing. But 3 years from now, you're not doing AI. I don't really get that.
Yeah. I don't see that. I think if I had to give advice to like a 30-something-year-old, right?
Yeah.
I think it would be two products. One would be, and they play off of each other, but the big one is just looking for ways to infuse AI in your life now, in small ways. And in doing so, you learn how you prefer to interact with AI.
Love that.
If you, for example, I used to spend forever meal planning for my family, right? My wife, 2 kids, for the week, and it would take forever, and then you have to place the order. And now I have a little system with a prompt that I've been playing with locally that goes through, it takes all of our preferences, and it says, okay, here's 4 meals. Here's the recipes. And I'm like, it needs to be under 30 minutes to cook. It needs to use how many ingredients. It needs to meet these like nutritional constraints. Boom. And then I'm like, great. It asks for my confirmation if I want to switch something out or if I want to do anything else with it. Once I say, okay, it creates that shopping list, and then it ships it into Instacart for me to review the order, and then done. Right.
Alex, are you starting a company? This is awesome.
This is me getting sick of purity, but really, like, it's stuff like that where you're like, why am I spending so much time doing something? Or like, I saw the link that Allie Miller, if you guys are familiar with her, she did one where she set it up so she could take a picture of her fridge and it will tell her what snacks are available, right? It can be little stuff like that. But as you do that more, it becomes more of a muscle that you build. And then you start learning, okay, where are the borders where I'm going to bump up against? How do I prefer to interact with AI systems across different modes and whatnot? And then as AI continues to evolve and then be implemented in organizations, you're already going to have that muscle to, one, identify where it can be strategically helpful. You're going to have familiarity with the tools, so you have better adoption of those, and your skills will be there. You don't need to know linear algebra and how all this works to get the most value out of AI. You do need to know how to use it, right? And so by just challenging yourself now for all the little stuff during the day of what you can use AI for, it's going to build that muscle so that when the time comes, you're going to be in a great position to take advantage of it.
Totally. That's all. I would also add to this, I love your examples. That was amazing, by the way. And I think we might need to do another episode on this fridge app you've built. That sounds incredible.
I knew Mike would be excited about that when you were saying that.
Yeah.
A couple of
with a newborn, right? Yeah.
I won't deviate too much, but I've definitely done some fun little projects there. I think the other big thing that we do not give ourselves credit about is the originality of us as individuals. And one thing that I've recommended to everybody who I'm saying, use ChatGPT, right? Use Claude, try these models out, play with them, but ask questions, don't ask for solutions. And the reason being is like, you as a decision maker need to continue to work that muscle. And if you're writing an email and you want like feedback on how to write it better, I wouldn't take what ChatGPT gives you. I'd say, hey, can you give me some suggestions on what I could do better?
Yeah.
Take that into your ecosystem and learn from it, because I personally believe that we are starting to develop the early signs of reliance on AI. And I think that's going to happen. I think the more that we teach ourselves to be stronger and smarter and better human beings, it will make us better at using AI, and it will improve our own quality. Like, we shouldn't need to use AI to write an email after we've learned how to write that email better. And we can, sure, there's a nuance there, but like even with what you're eating every day, give me a list of 3 options. Don't tell me what I'm eating for the day. I'll keep the choice within the person, because I think that will inherently make you stronger and more unique as an individual. Like, you have a voice, you have amazing thoughts. Like, use those to your advantage within these systems. Don't rely on the standard output that it's going to give you.
Yes. And I think you can even
You've got to look there.
no further than that, right? 'Cause I definitely do that. I'll be like, okay, give me 5 examples of this or 5 ideas here, and I'll pick from them. The other thing that I do at the start of my prompts is like ask questions along the way, right? And so I love doing that. And so that it oftentimes gives me a different venue to get a different perspective on what I'm asking, right? I'll be like, oh, what about this? Or what about that? And then sometimes like if I'm writing like a document or a proposal for something, I'll throw it in and I'll be like, okay, go through here and challenge some of these assumptions. Why are you challenging them? Or find places in here where it's vague or whatever, and help me craft a better narrative and give you a couple options, right? And doing that, again, this goes back to augmenting. I still have my expertise that I'm imparting on the system, but I'm using that to speed up the kind of creation process. And the other way I look at it too is, a lot of ideas, like if you go back to college and you're sitting in your dorm room at 3 a.m. with like your roommate and you guys are solving all the problems in the world, right? And we're going to be awesome, but the world's going to be awesome. Those ideas generated because you had that back and forth. You had that conversation going and you were able to ask questions about clarifying questions. Oh, that's a cool idea, and pull these. And you could treat like these LLMs the same way, to like challenge assumptions. And I think that's the important part. You got to be willing to challenge your own assumptions and your own learnings. Because if you're not, you're just going to get that same output every time. But you can use it as such a powerful like context and decision-making tool.
Totally. And the reason it got me, and I'm going off at a tangent here, is I was watching this video the other day of a woman at school in college, and a pop quiz came up on the screen. She took a picture of it, flipped it to her laptop, and solved every problem with PhotoMath or some other tool like that in 15 seconds. And I'm like, we are missing the point of leveraging AI to make us better at that point, and we're starting to become dependent on its solutions. And this, I know this goes on now with you. If you've been interviewing junior engineers, you see it all the time. Like reasoning skills are depleting. Like we're losing those skills, and it is so important that we keep them. And I think for us as a generation that didn't have this, we have a lot of that, and we're having these conversations. But the younger generations, they're just dependent on this technology like nothing we've ever seen before. And it's worrisome for me that a great example of something that's doing an amazing job is like a Conmigo. I don't know if Khan Academy. Oh yeah, they have an AI that's will only respond in Socratic methods. So you are trying to solve a math problem. It'll say, okay, what steps do you know? And it'll walk you through it as a teacher would. Like we need to be leveraging.
That's awesome.
It's an amazing tool. Like I think it's one of the best use cases of a large language model out there to date. But we need to be asking questions and brainstorming, not just relying on solutions, right?
There's also a book out there that I'm not affiliated with in any way, but it's Matt Bean, but it's called The Skill Code. And it's a book about how exactly what you're talking about, right? Is these younger generation coming through and not getting the touch of a master apprentice type transference of knowledge and expertise there. And when you bring up the girl taking the picture, you're not learning anything from that. You're expediting the solution, but you're not actually doing what the purpose of that quiz was for, right? You're circumventing it. And I think in the book, it really hammers the point of the more we abstract and make it easier for experts to do things, the wider that gap of mentorship becomes. And it's going to continue to have adverse effects on the skills that come through it. And I think going back to advice for young people, it is really going out of your way to find somebody and work with somebody to mentor you on the expertise so that you can then take those expertise and then in addition to your knowledge about the systems, enhance it. And I think that will put your career on a trajectory, right?
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, absolutely.
So there's a question we haven't asked yet, and it goes well with what we were just talking about, like new skills and roles. What do you think about when you think of the future for data organizations? What's going to be crucial in this Gen AI world?
Oh, man. So there are roles, I think, that will exist, right? And I'll go into those a little bit. But then there's also these changes to just the organizational alignment. And I think it's going to have really interesting impacts over there. But like from a roles perspective, we're going to continue to see prompt engineering specialists that are in there and like fine tuning the prompts that are used for these systems. People solely dedicated to, I'm calling them data quality orchestrators, not just like analysts, right? That are specialists in designing validation frameworks. They are specialists in optimizing these platforms for AI specifically, right? You can have governance roles that pop up, right? And these are all core foundational roles. But then you get into more strategic roles like AI ethics officers, innovation strategists that are focused on it. And then the last piece is operational roles. So things like, I think I found this one, somebody mentioned this to me a while ago, and I found it really interesting, is a human AI interaction designer, right? Somebody who is actually designing UX UI systems, has experience in human psychology, and is actually building all this in to optimize the human experience there and really pull that out. And I thought that one was really interesting as well.
Yeah, totally. It's there's so many roles that I think are going to be, you're going to specialize in, right? Like embeddings. I think there's going to be a whole, there already is people that focus on this, but it was very niche. Prior embedding specialists are going to be huge. I know people with PhDs in data science that this is what they're doing now. And I'm like, really? And he's, yeah, it's a pretty easy job. Like manage vector encodings and embeddings. And, and that's my role. And also I think that you'll see a big change in the amount of true AI specialist versus these like sub roles within AI, where it's more of like a certificate program or like an associate's degree of going through and learning how to work as a operator of AI, right? The same way in manufacturing, you've got people that design systems and then you have people that operate systems.
Yeah, very true. You saw that a little bit in data science, right?
Yeah.
And that whole wave that came through.
Absolutely.
But I do think it could be really interesting. I do think that we're going to start moving away from this hierarchical structure a little bit into more like traditional teams where you have analytics teams with very fixed roles, isolated apps for engineering teams. And then you move into more of a dynamic pod structure where you have scientists and engineers and domain experts all together. And I think that's going to start happening because you have these, when you infuse AI into that, you can speed up decision, you can speed up response time, you can iterate much faster, and you can solve these problems and then hand them off to what you were describing, right? The operators. And then you can disband and move and kind of position. Spotify has a model right now where they like tribes and groups and things like that. But I do think we'll start seeing these specialist pods that help solve problems with the verticals, with the business domains. And then you have some sort of transition effort that happens to the operators and maintainers. And then you disband and create different ones across the org as you devise value.
So quickly, and this will be our last question. This has been very good so far. Thank you. Again, this has been great. So when you think of emerging trends, technologies, in the AI and data space, what should organizations prepare for and think about?
What should they? You should be thinking about human AI, like collaborative teams between human and AI and what those interactions look like, right? Like how you treat AI as a team member and like a junior, right? You should be thinking about what does decision intelligence network look like across? What is the impact it's having on learnings, on the velocity of your decisions, on the capacity, right? That's another thing. How you can use AI to automate your cognition process of your workflow, right? Taking knowledge work and automating that, taking some complex decision automation and creative task assignment for that perspective. And yeah, I think operations is probably going to be an area where AI really takes off as well. So prepare what your ops teams and those types of functions are going to look like in addition when you have AI to augment it and what you're going to do with extra capacity. The answer is probably not just cut workflows because we get all this, we get all this extra capacity and efficiency. It should be, okay, we have this extra capacity to train, mentor, to bring up new skill sets, to get that next generation in play, to succession plan. We have this to actually take the experts and put them in those embedded pods as domain experts to help craft and fine tune these models. And trying to figure out what you're going to do with the extra efficiency and capacity that you get from actually implementing these things.
Alex, what do you think about the human side? I think that large language models and AI right now, they're very focused in silos, right? They're specific tasks. But as we get to multi-models and more even centralized models, I would say within an ecosystem, do you think that they're going to be working more with things like, and this is much more in the future, I would say not in the next year, but probably in the next 5 or 10 years even, but being able to see inefficiencies or synergies between business units, maybe between even people and personalities. Like we're going to be putting so much data and so many feelings and our communication styles into these systems. There might be ways that it could even see across these different borders differently than And I just am thinking back to the water coolers when I used to go into an office of, oh, I'm having trouble with this employee, or like, I'm not getting what I need from this manager.
Yep.
And like the only time that got escalated was like if I had to report something to HR, right? Or there was some big to do, but otherwise, like there might come a time where we're actually giving a lot of this information to an AI, right? And if it's centralized, can it see across those systems, do you think?
That's up to your org, right? Are you going to allow it?
Across the systems
Is yeah, I think one, at DBT, we have an AI function where we're really focusing on like rolling out a lot of functionality for like auto document generation, code generation, conversions to our semantic layer, all sorts of cool stuff like that. But as we talk about what does the future look like with AI, there are worlds where I could be an analytics engineer. I could get on in the morning. Oh, there was an error. I pull up the AI system. It helps me diagnose exactly what's wrong with the error. I confirm that is in fact not a false positive. And then it takes all that, gets the business contact and sends it off to the business owner, like the marketing individual, and says, hey, there's an issue. This is what's happened. Here's how we're remedying it. Or, hey, we saw a step change in the revenue numbers and it popped up. Let's package that. Let's send it off to somebody who can actually put their expertise on it and route those things. So then all of a sudden you're getting a proactive interaction. Just like the water cooler, oh, I saw this cool thing. What do you think? And then it can facilitate that knowledge dissemination as well.
I love that alignment, right? Like instant alignment. And in Detzel's case, instantly filing tickets, right? With 2 different organizations at the same time. I think that it's interesting, but like that idea of even a ticketing system may change completely in the future. And that kind of internal approval process, governance. I think we're a long way away from it, but that's something that excites me is instantaneous water cooler conversations, and resolutions.
Yeah.
In one swoop.
I mean, it feels like you could build such a system that tracks when you do trades and all these other things that says, you know what, you're making a bad decision, go with this. And then everybody gets rich because it knows everything. Just
Only the market
way out there, but
I think there is, can you imagine a system that, undertakes the request and understands the questions the business is asking, and then actually creates and breaks down those into tasks and then auto prioritizes them based on the business strategy and just assigns those up or gives more context to the analyst or coordinates certain meetings coming together because it needs this level of expertise from here and here, just like streamlining that whole automation. It could be a reality in 5 years or something, or tomorrow based on our trajectory. Wild.
what about like code that breaks all the time because it was just bad code?
Yep.
Right? Just implementing this AI system that looks at all your code and says, clean this up, push this button to do it. Boom, voila, it's clean. Because you have a lot of coders that leave, and so you bring in other coders, and I feel like that's a huge opportunity.
That's when I was talking about how I'm thinking about it and finding like those use cases that augment the team. That is a use case where we're like, okay, can you look at the DAG and say, okay, this is where your bottleneck inefficiency, or this is a critical point in your DAG and you need to do something special with it. And not only this is it, but explain why it is.
And then write some code for me.
Write the code and give me a recommendation and like on potential other paths forward. Right. And then it can open a PR request for you and actually say, boom. And then you can actually work with it there and speed up that whole development process.
Yeah. So many opportunities, I think, with AI and how we embed it into these new products and the skills needed. And Alex, this was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
We nerded out just like you promised. So
always looking forward to it. Easy as I guess. Really.
Did we miss anything that you think we should have covered?
The only other thing I would call out is we talked about frameworks, governance, and it touched a little bit on security frameworks and whatnot, but it is being aware of this whole world of bad actors is emerging now in the AI space. And so not only is your engineering and your data team, not only are they going to have to evolve, but your security teams will as well. And we're going to have to put in place, checks and balances to prevent against some of these bad actors that can figure out, you've already seen it, they can circumvent some of like the controls that I think it was Claude had, where they circumvented it and actually got the stuff behind the paywall. The more powerful AI becomes, the more that people are going to try and exploit it and push it. And this is a whole org change, right? Top to bottom, everyone needs to change the way they think and they adopt it if you're going to be extremely successful in 5 years. And so just don't neglect the areas that are necessarily like super obvious at first.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to another Data Hurdles. Please rate and review us. We'll make Alex rate and review us as well. But I'm Chris Detzel, and
I'm Michael Burke. Thanks for tuning in.
thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.